My name is Vera Stillman, and I am 47 years old. 14 months ago, 11 weeks after my husband Daniel died of a cardiac event at 51 years old, parents organized an estate sale at my childhood home and included, without telling me, 31 items that had belonged to Daniel, items I had stored at their house when I moved out of our apartment in the weeks after he died because I had nowhere else to put them, and because my parents had offered their garage, and I had believed the offer was what it appeared to be. I learned about the sale on the morning it was scheduled to begin from my neighbor, who had seen the listing online the previous evening and had sent me a screenshot with the words, "I think these might be yours." The listing included photographs. I recognized the reading lamp Daniel had kept on his side of the bed for 11 years. I recognized the wooden map of Portugal that had hung in every apartment we had ever shared. I recognized the 2 boxes of his books, listed as mixed lot, Scholars Library, priced at $40. Before I tell you what the auctioneer read aloud, and why my parents had not accounted for the person who had cataloged those items, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I want to know where you are. Now let me take you back 14 years to the night I met Daniel Stillman and explain what kind of man he was so that you understand what was in those boxes. Daniel Stillman was a historian, not a famous one, not the kind whose books are reviewed in the places that review books, but the kind who spent 30 years building a body of work that will matter to the people in his field for the next 100 years, which is a different, and in some ways more durable kind of fame than the other kind. He specialized in the material culture of the Portuguese Atlantic, which is to say he was interested in the objects that moved between continents in the 15th and 16th centuries, and what those movements revealed about the people who moved them, what they valued, what they carried, what they left behind. He collected in the specific and considered way of someone who understands that an object and its history are inseparable, things that had provenance, which is the word historians use for the documented chain of ownership of an object, the record of where it has been and whose hands it has passed through, and what those passages meant. Every object Daniel owned that had historical significance had a provenance document. He had created them himself, in most cases, using the same research methods he used for his academic work, and he had stored them in a red accordion folder that he kept in the upper left drawer of his desk. And when he died, the folder was in that drawer, and I had put it in one of the boxes of his books when I packed his office. And the box had gone to my parents' garage, and my parents had included it in the estate sale without opening it. I met Daniel in 2009 at a conference in Lisbon that I was attending in my capacity as a conservator for a mid-sized museum in Boston, which is the profession I have had for 20 years, and which requires the same qualities that Daniel's profession required, which is close attention, precision, and a specific and patient relationship with objects as carriers of meaning, rather than as things whose value is adequately described by their price. He was presenting a paper about a set of navigational instruments that had been incorrectly attributed for 70 years, and that he had reattributed through a combination of archival research and the kind of sustained material attention that most historians did not bother with because it required understanding objects as well as documents. I wasn't because the paper was relevant to a conservation project I was working on. He was 43. I was 33. We talked after the session for 2 hours, and then we had dinner, and then we talked for 3 more hours. And I flew home the following week, knowing that I had met someone I was not going to recover from, which is the most accurate description of falling in love I have found, and which Daniel, when I told him this later, said was both accurate and slightly alarming and also exactly right. We married in 2011 in Boston at the museum where I worked, which was the right venue for exactly the reasons you would expect from 2 people in our professions, and we built a life in the specific way that 2 people build a life when they are both deeply interested in the same set of questions approached from different angles, which is to say we worked constantly and argued about things that mattered and ate dinner late and traveled whenever there was a conference and filled every apartment we ever lived in with objects that had stories and books that had marginalia and maps pinned to walls, and the accumulated residue of two people who believed that the things you surround yourself with are not decoration but evidence. Daniel died in January of 2023 on a Tuesday at his desk from a cardiac event that the medical examiner described as sudden, and that his cardiologist, reviewing the previous 6 months of records, said had been building in ways that none of the available tests had been specific enough to catch. He was 51 years old. He had been working on the 3rd volume of a series about Portuguese maritime trade. The manuscript was 60% complete and was on his hard drive, and has since been completed, in consultation with his graduate students and his editor, which is not a small thing, and which is a story for another time. I am telling you this because what was in his office when he died, and what I packed in those boxes, was not furniture. It was a man's life's work and his collection and his provenance files, and my parents sold it with the precision of people who had looked at 31 objects and seen $40. My parents, whose names are Frank and Helen Rossi, live in Needham, Massachusetts, which is the town I grew up in, and which is 40 minutes from the apartment in Boston where Daniel and I lived for the last 6 years of our marriage. They are not cruel people. I have been precise about this distinction in every conversation I have had about this story, because the distinction is real and because I owe them the accuracy of it. They are not cruel. They are practical in the specific and limited way of people who have never had to develop a relationship with objects as anything other than objects, and who have spent their lives in a household where things were kept because they were useful, and given away when they stopped being useful, and who applied this framework to 31 of their dead son-in-law's belongings without, I believe, understanding what they were doing. I believe this. I also believe that not understanding what you are doing does not relieve you of responsibility for what you have done, and that the distinction between malice and carelessness, while real, does not change the outcome for the person on the receiving end of either one. My mother had offered the garage 2 weeks after Daniel died, during the period when I was making the decisions that needed to be made while experiencing a grief that made all decisions feel like they were being made underwater. I said yes, because I had nowhere else to put things, and because saying no to a reasonable offer from my parents during the worst period of my adult life felt impossible. I moved 31 items into their garage on a Saturday in February. By April, the items were in an estate sale listing. I found out on a Saturday morning in April at 8:14 in the morning when my neighbor's screenshot arrived on my phone. I was sitting at my kitchen table with coffee. The screenshot showed a listing for an estate sale beginning at 10 that morning. The listing had been posted the previous evening. It had photographs. I recognized the reading lamp immediately. I recognized the wooden map immediately. The 2 boxes of books were listed as separate lots. There was also a description of what the listing called a collection of vintage academic materials, which included, I understood from the photograph, the red accordion folder. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I said her name, and then I said I was looking at an estate sale listing. She said, "Yes, we have been meaning to talk to you about the garage." I said I was looking at photographs of Daniel's things in the listing. She said some of it was just clutter, Vera. Things you have not looked at in 2 months, and you are never going to use a reading lamp with that kind of base in your new apartment. I did not say anything for 4 seconds. Then I said I was coming. She said the sale started at 10 and people would be arriving. I said I know when it starts. I was in the car in 11 minutes. I want to pause here because I know what you are feeling, and I want to be honest with you about what I was feeling, which was not the volcanic grief rage that the situation might seem to call for. What I felt in those 11 minutes in the car was something colder and more specific than rage, which was the recognition that I had made a mistake by not being precise enough about what I was asking my parents to do when I asked them to store Daniel's things, and that the mistake was mine and had cost something real, and that the most important thing I could do in the next 2 hours was not to perform my grief for my parents or for anyone else, but to do my job, which is the job I have done for 20 years, which is to look at objects and understand what they are and document what they carry and ensure that documentation is not lost. Have you ever been in a situation where your professional training became the only available instrument for managing something personal? Have you ever had to be competent about something that was also breaking you? Tell me in the comments. I read all of them. And please subscribe now if you have not already, because what happened when I arrived at my parents' house and what the auctioneer read aloud in front of the people who had come to buy Daniel's things is the part I need you to be here for. The estate sale at my parents' house was being run by a company called Brentwood Estate Services, which was a 2-person operation managed by a woman named Patricia Ames, who had been running estate sales in the greater Boston area for 19 years, and who I found at the registration table in my parents' driveway. When I arrived at 9:40, there were already 11 people browsing. I showed Patricia the listing on my phone, and I told her that the items I was pointing to were not part of my parents' estate, that they had belonged to my late husband, that they had been stored in the garage with the understanding that they would be returned to me, and that I needed to remove them from the sale. Patricia said she understood, and that she would need to speak with her clients, meaning my parents, before she could authorize the removal. I said I understood. My mother appeared from the side door while Patricia was still talking. She said, "Vera, people are here," I said. "I know people are here." Patricia said she would need a few minutes to sort this out. My father came out of the house. He said it was a lot of things to store, Vera. Nobody is using them. I said that was not the relevant question. Patricia said she would like to review the items in question before we continued. We went into the garage. Patricia had her clipboard. She walked through the 31 items I identified, and she noted each one. She was methodical and quiet, and she had the specific quality of a professional who has navigated family conflict in the context of estate sales before, and who understood that her job in this moment was to be accurate rather than to take a side. When we reached the red accordion folder, she asked what it was. I told her it was a provenance file. She asked me to explain what that meant. I told her. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said that she had not understood what these items were when she took the listing. My mother said that they were storage items that had been in the garage for 2 months. Patricia said to me, "Did your husband create documentation for the items in this folder?" I said he had, and that the folder also contained the provenance documents for the 31 items I had identified, plus approximately 40 additional items that were not present because they had been stored elsewhere. Patricia looked at the folder, and then she looked at my mother, and then she looked at me, and she said she would like to step outside. Outside in the driveway, with 11 potential buyers still moving through the garage and the house, Patricia told me that she had accepted the listing in good faith, and that if I was asserting that items had been included without my knowledge or consent, she would need to pause the sale on those items pending clarification of ownership. I said I was asserting exactly that. She said she would need some documentation of Daniel's ownership of the items. I said I had the provenance folder in my hand. She said she would need a few minutes to review it. I gave her the folder. She took it to the registration table, and she sat down and she opened it, and she began reading. I stood near the table. My parents stood on the other side of the driveway. My father had his hands in his pockets. My mother was looking at the house. The 11 potential buyers continued to move through the sale, unaware that a pause was in progress at the registration table. Patricia read for 17 minutes. I know it was 17 minutes because I stood there and counted the time without looking at anything except the folder in her hands and the occasional expression that moved across her face as she read. Patricia closed the folder. She looked at me, and then she looked at my parents. She said she needed to read something aloud, for the record, and she asked the three of us to listen. She opened the folder to the section covering the wooden map of Portugal, which was the most significant item in the sale, listed at $350, and which Daniel had spent 4 years tracing to a Portuguese cartographer's workshop in the 1580s. She read the provenance document aloud. It took 4 minutes. It described the map's material composition, its cartographic conventions, its relationship to a specific tradition of nautical mapping in late 16th century Lisbon, its documented passage through 3 collections over 400 years, the research methodology Daniel had used to establish each link in the chain, and at the bottom of the document in Daniel's handwriting, a note he had written when he acquired the map in 2014, which said, in the direct and unguarded way that he wrote when he was writing for himself, rather than for publication, acquired for Vera, who understands what it means that this still exists. Patricia read this last sentence twice. I had not read it before. I had not known it was there. The driveway was completely silent. My father had taken his hands out of his pockets. My mother was not looking at the house anymore. Patricia closed the folder. She said to my mother and father, in a voice that was entirely professional, and that did not need to be anything other than professional, because the content had done all the necessary work, that she was removing all 31 identified items from the sale effective immediately, and that she would note in her records that the items had been determined to be outside the scope of the listing. She said she was sorry for any confusion. She picked up the folder and she handed it back to me. She said it had been an honor to read. Then she went back to the registration table and she continued running the sale. And I picked up the reading lamp and I carried it to my car. And then I went back and I got the wooden map and then the boxes of books and I made 4 trips and I put everything in my car and I drove home. My parents watched me from the driveway. My father said Vera once, when I was on the 2nd trip. I said, "Not right now, Dad." He nodded. He did not say anything else. The drive home was 20 minutes. I did not call anyone. I parked in the garage of my building, and I sat in the car for about 10 minutes, and I let what had just happened take whatever shape it was going to take. The shape it took was not the shape I expected, which I had imagined would be some form of relief or vindication or righteous clarity. The shape it took was grief, plain and specific, the same grief that had been sitting under everything for 11 weeks, and that the events of the morning had stripped of whatever protective distance time had been building around it. Daniel had written that note in 2014. I had not known about it. He had acquired the map for me, and he had written a private record of why and I had not known for 9 years. And now I knew, and he was not there to tell. I sat in the car and I let that be what it was, which was both the saddest and the most specific evidence of love I had encountered in 11. Weeks of looking for evidence of it in everything he had left behind. And then I went upstairs and I put the lamp on my side of the bed because that is where it belonged now. And I put the map on the wall where the wall was empty. And I opened the first box of books and I started to look at what he had written in the margins, which I had been planning to do since February and had not been able to bring myself to start. Before I tell you what happened with my parents in the weeks after that morning, I want to stop here. If you have lost someone, and you have found evidence of their love for you in something they did not intend you to find, or in something that almost did not survive to be found, tell me about it in the comments. Tell me what it was and where you found it. I read every word, and these are the ones I come back to most. And if you are in the middle of grief right now, and you are looking for evidence in all the wrong places and not finding it, I want you to know that the evidence is usually where the other person put it, rather than where you are.
looking. Because I'm anxiety because what happened when my parents called me 3 days later and what I said to them and what my
Father said that I was not expecting is the part of the story that took me the longest to find words for. My mother called on Tuesday, 3 days after the sale. I answered because I had decided before she called that I was going to answer when she called and that I was going to say what I had to say once, clearly, and then decide what came next based on what she did with it. She said she was sorry. She said it immediately, before anything else, which was not her usual pattern. And the departure from pattern told me she had been thinking carefully about the call. I said I was listening. She said she had not understood what the things were. She said she had thought they were storage items, furniture and boxes that I was not using, that were taking up space in the garage. I said I understood that was what she had thought. I said I wanted to tell her what they actually were, and I told her, specifically, the same way Patricia had read aloud in the driveway. Not with emotion, but with precision, because precision was the only thing available that would be fair to both of us. I told her about the provenance folder. I told her about the note. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she had not known Daniel did things like that, kept records like that. I says most people who did not know him well did not know that about him. She said she supposed she had not known him well, which was the most honest thing she had said to me in the 3 years since Daniel and I had stopped living near enough to my parents for them to have regular access to our lives. I said that was also fair. I said I was not going to tell her what she should have done differently, because I thought she already knew. She said she did. We stayed on the phone for another few minutes, and then she said she was glad I had gotten there in time. And I said I was too, and we said goodbye. My father called the following evening. He called at 7, which is when he calls, when he is calling for himself rather than at my mother's instigation, and the timing told me this was his call rather than a follow-up to hers. He said he had been thinking about the note. He said, and this was what I had not expected, that he was ashamed. He used that word exactly. He said he had put things in the sale because he had thought it would help me, that having fewer reminders around would make things easier, that the practical thing to do with items you were not using was to move them on, and that he had believed he was doing a practical and helpful thing. He said he had realized, sitting in the driveway watching me carry things to my car, that he had been making the decision that an item's purpose was finished before the person who loved it had made that decision, and that this was something he had done his whole life in ways he had never examined, and that watching me carry Daniel's lamp to my car on a Saturday morning in April had been the moment he finally examined it. He said this slowly and without performance, in the voice of a man who has reached a conclusion he did not want to reach, and is telling you about it. Anyway, because he has decided that honesty is more important than comfort at 73 years old. I said I appreciated him telling me. I said that the note was the thing I would carry from all of it, not what had happened before I found it, but the finding of it, and that in a strange way the morning had given me something I would not have had otherwise, which was the knowledge that Daniel had written it and what it said. My father was quiet, and then he said that was a generous way to receive what had happened. I said I was trying. He said he knew. We talked for another 20 minutes about ordinary things, and then we said goodnight. The provenance folder is on my desk. I have been working through it methodically, the way I work through everything, object by object, document by document, and I have found 4 more notes in Daniel's handwriting, at the bottom of provenance files, for items he acquired after we married. Each note is different. Each note is specific to the object and to whatever was happening in his thinking when he acquired it. And to me, it's always to me because he wrote these notes as for himself, and I was in all of his thinking, and therefore in all of his private records. I have read each note twice, and I have filed them in order, and I have not shared them with anyone because they are not public records. They are the private commentary of a man who believed that the things you kept should be documented, and who documented them with the specific honesty of someone who never expected anyone else to read what he wrote. I am reading them. That is enough. The map is on the wall in my apartment. The lamp is on my side of the bed. The books are on the shelves I built for them in the week after I brought them home. Organized the way Daniel organized his books, by subject and then by date, which takes longer than alphabetical, and produces a library that can be read as an argument, which is what a historian's library is. I work in that apartment now, and I live in it, and the objects in it are documented, and their documentation is safe, and the work continues, which is the only thing I know how to offer the people I have loved, which is to be a careful steward of what they left behind, and to make sure the record is accurate and complete and does not get lost. I want to say something about Patricia Ames that I did not say in the account of that morning, because she deserves more than the functional role she played in the narrative, and because what she did was not a small thing, even though it was entirely within the scope of her professional obligations. Patricia Ames has been running estate sales for 19 years, and in those 19 years, she has encountered, I would estimate, most of the configurations that human families produce when a person dies and leaves behind objects and the objects become contested. She handled my parents and me with the specific and practiced equilibrium of someone who has been in more than one driveway where the grief was present and the logistics were also present. And somebody needed to do the logistics carefully so that the grief did not make them worse. She read the provenance document aloud because it was relevant to the determination she needed to make about ownership, which was her professional obligation. And she read it the way she read it, which was with the full weight of what it contained, because she is a person who understood what she was reading and gave it what it deserved. I called her the following week to thank her. She said she had been thinking about the folder. She said in 19 years she had never encountered anything like it. A private provenance archive maintained by a private collector at that level of documentary rigor. I said Daniel was a historian. She said she had gathered that from the reading. She said she hoped I would take care of it. I said I intended to. She said she was glad I had arrived when I did. I said I was glad my neighbor had seen the listing. She laughed, which was the right response, and we said goodbye. My colleague at the museum, a woman named Rosamond who has been a conservator for 30 years, and who has the specific quality of someone who understands grief, because she has worked with objects long enough to understand what loss means, came over 2 weeks after the sale to help me catalog Daniel's collection properly. This was her idea, and she offered it the way she offers everything, without making the offer feel like charity, by saying she had a Saturday free, and she thought the work would be interesting, and that she had wanted to see his collection for years. We worked for 7 hours. Rosamond has a system for documentation that is more comprehensive than Daniel's, which is not a criticism of Daniel's system, but a reflection of the fact that she has been doing this in an institutional context for 30 years, and the institutional context provides templates and conventions that an individual working alone does not have access to. We applied her system to each of the 31 items I had recovered and to the 40 additional items from his collection that I had stored in my own apartment. And by the end of the day, there was a complete catalog with photographs and condition notes, and Rosamond's professional assessment of each item's historical significance and conservation needs. The catalog is in a dedicated folder on my hard drive and in a printed binder on my desk next to the provenance folder. Daniel's provenance folder is still organized in his system, because his system is also good, and because changing it would mean reorganizing the notes, which I am not willing to do yet. The two systems exist side by side, his and the institutional one, and together they constitute a record that is more complete than either would be alone, which is probably true of most of the things he and I built together, that the combination was better than the individual parts, and which I find useful to remember on the days when the apartment is very quiet and the map is on the wall, and the lamp is on, and I am reading his marginalia in a book he read in 2018 and wondering what he would have made of a Tuesday in April, when an auctioneer in a driveway in Needham read his private words aloud to the empty morning air. The graduate students completed Daniel's manuscript. His editor at the press had worked with him for 12 years, and she managed the process of completion with a care that I watched from a distance and that I found difficult to describe, except as a form of professional love for the work and for the person who had produced it. The manuscript was submitted in October, 9 months after Daniel died. It will be published next spring. His name is the only name on the cover, which is correct, because the work is his even though several other people finished the sentences. His editor asked me to write a brief foreword. I wrote it in one sitting at my kitchen table in November late at night with the map on the wall and the lamp on. The foreword is 4 paragraphs. The last paragraph says that Daniel believed the most important thing a historian could do was to make the record accurate and complete, and to ensure that it did not get lost, and that he practiced this belief in his scholarship and in his life, and that the evidence of that practice is in the objects he collected and the documents he created and the notes he wrote in the margins of books and at the bottoms of provenance files in a red accordion folder that I keep on my desk and return to when I need to remember what it looks like when someone pays the kind of sustained attention that most people consider excessive and that turns out to be the most complete form of love available. His editor read the foreword and she called me and she said it was exactly right. I said I thought so, too. The manuscript goes to the printer in January. That is something. It is not enough, and it is also something, which is the accounting that grief produces when you do it honestly. Not enough, and also something, not the life you planned and also the life you have, not the man in the apartment, and also the map on the wall, and the note at the bottom of the file, and the lamp on the side of the bed where it belongs. My parents and I have seen each other 3 times since the sale. The first time was in June, at their house for dinner, which I attended because my father had asked and because the asking had been genuine, and because I understood that relationships between people who have hurt each other and known each other for 47 years are not rebuilt by staying away from each other. We ate at the kitchen table and my father had grilled fish, because it was the thing I had always requested at their house since I was a child, and the requesting of it was his form of the conversation he did not know how to have any other way. My mother talked about her garden. I talked about work. Nobody mentioned the sale until the end of the evening when I was getting my coat, and my father said, in the hallway, that he was glad the folder was safe. I said I was too. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder, and then he went to the kitchen. The second time was in August when they came to my apartment for the first time. My mother stood in front of the map for a long time. She did not say anything about it, and I did not ask her to. The third time was in October, my birthday, at a restaurant my father chose, and it was an ordinary dinner, in the way that dinners become ordinary again, when the thing that happened between the people at the table has been named and set down and is no longer being carried through every room, which does not mean it is forgotten, only that it has found its place, which is different from disappearing, and which is the closest available approximation of peace between people who have known each other long enough to have built something worth saving. If you have someone's things and you have not yet gone through them, I want to tell you something. Go through them carefully. Read what is written. Look at what was kept and think about why it was kept, and let the kept things tell you what the person who kept them was thinking, because they were thinking of you more than you know, and they left the evidence where they thought you would find it, and they were right that you would find it, even if it took a Saturday morning in April and an auctioneer with 19 years of experience and a professional obligation to read things aloud before you got there. The evidence was always going to find you. That is what documentation is for. Tell me in the comments what you have found. in someone's things that you were not expecting. Tell me what it told you. Subscribe if you have not already and check the link in the description. There is more there, and I think you will find what you need.